My father's off his rocker. So, we've built up the family business over years of hard work and sweat. And now, turns out my father is a no-good, dirty, rotten cheater. He cheated on my mother with his mistress, which is like 30 years younger than him. And get this, he has the audacity to tell us right to our face, "Hey, I'm putting my new mistress on the will, and she's getting everything." I, female 46, thought I had a really stable family, and I never thought that all the stupid things that I read happened to other families would ever happen to us. I see it all the time where kids complain that their parents are separated and they're torn between two homes. They don't get on with their parents or their siblings cause problems, but this is not something I could ever relate to. I was raised in a family with both parents, and I have a good relationship with my brother, Paul. My mom and dad have been married since they were teenagers, and my mom's family is well off, so they're always comfortable. When my dad finished his training as a mechanic, since he loves cars, he decided to open his own business, and my mom's family gave him the money to buy the first garage. He's really good at what he does, and one garage turned into two, then three, and before long he had a really booming business that covered all areas of car repair and servicing. It meant that as a family we ended up extremely well off, and I had a fantastic upbringing with holidays and everything I needed. I'm not saying this to show off, I'm just letting people know that there's never been any conflict in the family until recently. I got married and had children, and my parents were amazing grandparents to my kids. Paul, well, he came out as gay when he was 16, and my parents have never once judged him and welcomed his husband into the family with open arms. To say that we never expected that what was coming is an understatement. I don't want to get ahead of myself, so I'll start at the beginning and where things started to go oh so wrong. This whole situation is the fault of two people, and because of them, things will never be the same for us as a family again. One of those people is my father, and the other is a money-grabbing skunk named Becky. My dad, George, he's 66, but still works full-time in the garage and is extremely fit. One of the things about working with cars, well, his whole life, is that he's always just good kept himself fit and healthy, as it is hard work at times taking out engines, carrying around car parts and tires. My brother works in the garage with Dad, and he's also extremely fit and active. I work for the family business, but I do the accounts and work with customers because I never really got interested in fixing cars like my brother. My mom does not do much about the business, and is happy to look after her grandkids while we work. She wrote some children's books, which did well, and so she does that in her spare time. She doesn't need money, but enjoys telling stories. One day, Becky appeared at the garage with her car for servicing, and my father was the one who was going to do it for free. Becky vaguely knew my brother and his husband through an extended friend group, and it had come up in conversation that we were well off and owned garages. I don't know who told her we were well off, but she had asked if we could do the services, and he just said, "Sure, just bring your car in and we'll look at it." Well, Paul was busy, and so my dad did not service, and Becky hung around chatting with him. That's not usual, as normally customers drop the cars off and come back later in the day. Paul mentioned in passing as a joke that Becky must have had a thing for mechanics. Little did we know that was like a prophecy that was waiting to be fulfilled. The signs of what was happening were right there in front of us, but none of us saw it coming. I guess we thought that my dad was an intelligent man and would not be as stupid as he turned out to be. We seriously underestimated my father's intelligence and ability to think using his brain, and not his other body parts. I don't know when the affair started, or why my father thought it would be a good idea to risk his good life for Becky, but that is what he did. I wish I could say this was a simple situation where I could just come and moan that my stupid father had some sort of midlife crisis and had a brief affair. But things are a lot more complicated than that. And now we need to work out what to do. There's a lot to this story, but for now I'll give you an overview of things that led us to the point we're at now. And if and when we work out what the hell to do about the fallout, I guess I will add updates along the way, if anyone wants to see that. As I said, Becky came for a service with her car and chatted with my father the whole time. Becky is young, flirty, and in my eyes extremely annoying, but to my father she seemed to flatter his ego. I can't lie, and I have to admit that she is a good-looking woman. In some ways, she's blonde, very slim, and she wears a ton of makeup. And well, yeah, short skirts. And even at the stage had some, quote, enhancements just to up her natural look. My dad was initially flattered by the attention, but I honestly think that if Becky had never came back after the initial contact, he would have never even thought of her for another day. However, she did come back. Looking back, I think her initial plan might have been to go after my brother until she realized he was gay and decided that my father would be an easier target. Let's face it, he was flattered a younger woman was into him. I don't know when it turned from her coming in for various issues with her car to a full-on affair, but that's what happened. Of course, none of us knew anything about this, and it's been going on for quite some time now without us ever having a clue. I asked my mom if she knew the earlier one, but she denied that she did. I'm not sure, as she must have noticed some of the signs. Anyways, at some point, it went from Becky flirting with my dad to them meeting for coffee, and then for lunch, and then meeting at more private places as their relationship began to blossom and become physical. My dad wasn't really good at hiding things, but we really did have no idea. I guess it was only a matter of time before Becky wanted more than she was getting, and things would come to a head. Well, turns out this is where we are now, and I'm angry and upset right now, so getting this off my chest before I decide what to do. My dad came into my office and said he wanted to talk to me about something. I assumed it was something to do with the business as I deal with the paperwork, but even if I had 100 guesses, heck, 1,000 guesses, I would not have guessed what it was that he wanted to talk about. My father is changing his will in favor of Becky. He just came out and said it, with no warning that my life was about to be pulled apart. He said that he had grown attached to Becky, a person I did not know at all at this point, and he wanted to make sure that she was a provider for, as my mom was well off in her own right. He thought, the best way that he could do that was to change the will so that she would benefit from the most of it. He said that Paul and I were comfortable and we had good lives, so he was sure that we would understand. He wanted me to witness the change in his will, as though I would be perfectly happy with it and A-OK. So, in one conversation, I found out that my dad was having an affair with a woman young enough to be his granddaughter, and was planning on cutting my mother, brother, and myself out of his will. I told him there's no way in hell I was witnessing that will, and he needs to get a grip. I was just so angry at the time. My dad left my office, and I swear he looked genuinely confused and upset at how I acted. Please, someone tell me that I'm not wrong here. Tell me this isn't normal. What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. So update number 1 did not come out for a few days. However, we find ourselves in a heck of a situation. If you guys are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe by clicking that subscribe button underneath the video. It does support me a lot and it helps me out so much. Let's go ahead now and jump into update number 1 and see how OP is going to deal with her father. I am genuinely touched by some of the replies I've had from this, and it surprised me that some people had also gone through some similar things. Apparently, there are more predatory young women and stupid old men there than I thought. I guess I've, led a sheltered life. After my meeting with my father, I called Paul up to talk to me and explained what just happened. He thought I was playing some kind of prank on him, to begin with, until I showed him the will. My dad had left it on the desk, as he still seemed to think I would realize it was not as bad of an idea, and would witness the changes for him. Paul read through the amendment and got angrier and angrier by the second. He asked me whether I was planning on witnessing it, and I asked him whether he thought I was an idiot or not, because it would be such a stupid thing to do. He apologized and said he was just in shock about the whole situation, and asked what we should do. Should we tell our mother? Well, that was something I've been thinking about for a while, as my dad was having an affair with Becky. Then the person who was going to be hurt the most was my mother. She was being treated like a fool by her own husband. My mom is a really wonderful person, and it made me feel sick to my stomach that my father would do this to her. I also had grown up thinking that my dad was an intelligent man, but he was not acting like one in any way. I made the decision to talk to Becky, which in hindsight was a stupid idea, as I think it made her even more determined to carry on with her plan. I met her in a cafe after Paul managed to get a hold of her number through a mutual friend of theirs. She was late, which I think was a bit of a power play on her part, as if I was going to feel less of a woman next to, someone like her. She flounced in all blonde hair Barbie-like, short skirt and cheap perfume I could smell from a mile away, and sat down opposite of me. She looked around to check whether people had noticed her arrival or not, and she sat down opposite of me and ordered the drink, just staring at me. I asked her what the heck she thought she was doing, having an affair with someone as old as my father. Was she some kind of homewrecker by choice? Becky laughed and said I had no idea what I was saying, and I have no say in what my father did. And you could not steal someone from their wife who did not want to be stolen. I told her that there's no way I was witnessing the will, so she would not be getting a thing. She just laughed and said, "You think you're the only person who could witness it? Don't be stupid. We'll just get someone else to do it. One way or the other, I will be getting that money." She seemed so sure of herself, and I realized that this was not some half-baked plan. She had really thought it through. I was so angry, but I did not want to cause a scene in a public space, so I stood up to leave as Becky added these words. "Anyways, I can just get him to spend it all on me without the will. Oh, honey, I can be very persuasive." I didn't answer. I just left and tried to get my head around what we could do to stop what was happening and protect my mother. So, I called up Paul and told him that Becky was not going to back down. And he told me that my dad had been back to work and asked him to witness the change of the will. Paul obviously stated no, so my father had taken the will to have someone else do it for him. I was worried, as once that happened, the will would be legal, and Becky would have won. I told Paul that he needed to meet me at our parents' house, because although it would be hard, we needed to warn my mother what was coming. There was no way we could protect her from this anymore, and it would be cruel to not tell her and let her carry on thinking that her marriage was happy and healthy. There had to be something we could do. I just didn't know what. For now, all I could think was about protecting my mother. And I suppose in a selfish way I was thinking about my own inheritance. Paul and I had worked hard over the years to make the business such a success alongside Father. It was simply not fair that some woman could just turn up and take that all away from us. As I drove to my parents' house, I was getting angrier and angrier, and it hurt me that my dad, who I'd always been so close to, would treat us like this. He was going to tear the family apart over some stupid midlife crisis with a woman who would get what she wanted and then disappear. There was no way that Becky was actually in love with Dad, and he was just a stupid old fool for thinking she was. Update number 2. Hey guys, I was so tired the last time I updated this, and I could never have expected what happened when Paul and I arrived at my parents' house to talk with Mom. We did not know how to approach it. After all, you can't just walk in and say, "Hey Mom, Dad's cheated on you with a younger woman who wants to take all our money." That seemed a bit callous, a callous way to go about it. Instead, we talked about the weather, the garage, and a book I've been reading, and looking back, it was so obvious that something wasn't right. Because we were like two nervous children who had a secret they were scared their parents would find out. I'm telling you, my mom is not an idiot. After she made coffee, she looked at both of us and asked when we're going to tell her what we were actually here for. She said she loved us, but we were awful liars, and it was obvious that something was bothering us, and I decided to just spit it out and say it. "Mom, Dad's having an affair with a woman called Becky, and he's changed the will so that she will get everything. He's writing us out of it." Well, so guys, get this. This is where I get extremely confused, as my mom just starts laughing. Paul and I sat there just looking at each other, thinking that my mom had lost her darn marbles about what we told her. It was, after all, a huge shock. Well, Paul and I sat down looking at each other, thinking that maybe we might need to get help for her. But finally, she stopped laughing and looked dead at us. My mom knew all about it, and had known about it for a while now. My dad was not very good at hiding things, as it turned out, and when he had been paying for things for his quote mistress, he had used the joint account, and so Mother saw all the money that was being sent. We couldn't understand why she seemed to be so unfazed by it, though. I think she could see that I was shocked at her response, and she sighed and said that she had been upset to begin with. But then she had watched my father making a fool of himself over and over, and began to think that there was no point getting herself all worked up, because that would only hurt herself and not anybody else. So I asked what she thought about the will, as it would mean that she lost everything. My mom, well, to be honest, she didn't reply straight away. Instead, she got up, disappeared into the study, returning a few minutes later with a file of papers which she handed over to me and Paul. She sat quietly while I read it, and when I finished, I looked at her with my eyebrows raised. As I think I had previously mentioned, my mom came from a fairly well-off family, and they had put forward a lot of money towards setting up my dad's business. From the very beginning, my grandpa had worried about my mom and whether she would be taken for a ride by father, and so, being the grandpa that he was, he had insisted on a prenuptial agreement that would protect my mother in case my father ever did anything which would leave my mom high and dry, which is exactly what he was doing now. My mom had been aware of my father's little affair for months, and she had been building up evidence against him so that the ammunition she needed to take him to the cleaners and divorce court. She admitted to me that she had been worried about her marriage for a while before all this even happened, and she thought that my father was struggling with getting older, and also with the fact that his wife was now looking older as well. I should say, I'm gonna add it right here, my mother is beautiful, and she always will be, but obviously she looks older than she did when they got married. That's how life works after all. Well, she's amazing, a strong woman, and I will forever be proud to be her daughter. Even more so once I heard she hired a private investigator to follow my dad around and get photo evidence. He was also looking into Becky and her background. I was stunned at her preparation, and when Paul and I left, we're both just much happier about the situation. My mom told us to leave it with her and that she would be speaking to her solicitor the next day. I'm torn at the moment in some ways because I know that what my dad has done and is still doing is wrong on so many levels. But he's my dad, I love him. I think he's a stupid old fool who's trying to stay young, but not in a healthy way, but rather in a way that's hurting our entire family. I think once my mom speaks to her solicitor, things will move toward the finale of this sordid affair. I was going to keep writing, mainly just to clear my mind, but I think I will wait and update you once everything settles. I'm not conceited enough to think that anyone's really that invested in our family that I need to update total strangers on every moment of our life. If you want to know what happened, keep watching. I'll be back. Final update. Well, OP is back. Well, it's over. Mostly. There are some things that will be sorted out quickly, and there will always be a wound between my parents and between my father and me. I'm hurt by what he wanted to do and how he had no care of how that would affect us at all. I had some messages after my initial post, saying that my father was a grown man and could do whatever he wanted, and he didn't know us an inheritance or anything. Well, I agree. But he also doesn't have a right to destroy the family business that we've all worked so hard to build, just because he wants a bit of fun with a younger woman. He doesn't have the right to hurt my mother because she's daring to get older. It was interesting to see most of these comments from men. Anyways, enough of my feminist learnings. As my dad was changing the will, my mom decided that she could not wait any longer to start getting things sorted. The day after Paul and I went to see her, she went to her solicitor and told him the updated information. It turned out she'd been talking to him for weeks before we found out there was even an issue. So, one important legal thing I should point out is that a prenuptial agreement does not outrank a will, as it is a document that protects the person's assets when they're going into a marriage. In the case of divorce, if the person has a lot of money before they enter the wedding. So, my mom's dad had the family solicitors create a legal document that protected my mom's family money in case of divorce. My grandpa was such an intelligent man, and he also insisted that the firm was not put in my dad's name, so that he did not have ownership over the whole company. Instead, he was granted a percentage that was his to profit from. The rest firstly in my mom's name before she signed her share over to Paul and me when we reached 21. I didn't actually know that, as the business name was still my mom's, as it always has been. It has always just been a family joke that the garage was named after a woman, not a burly man. Anyways, there's a lot of legal fighting and legal tape, and I'm not going to bore you guys with the fine details. In the end, even though it was my life it was dealing with, I was bored to tears with all the documents and legal jargon that I did not fully understand. Thankfully, our family solicitor is amazing. His firm has represented my family for generations on my mother's side. I will, however, give you all the juicy details about the human fallout from this nightmare. Let's face it, this is what strangers on the internet come back for. No one's interested in legal parts of the cases. They want to hear the juice about the human casualties and successes. You're probably reading this and saying, no, I'm here to see justice done and the good person to win. I'm not here to see the bad guys suffer and their lives fall apart, I promise. Well, if you're thinking that, you're, deluding yourself and a liar. I'm as guilty as anyone else for wanting to see the train wrecks of strangers' lives. My mom had her solicitor draft up the divorce paper on the grounds of my dad's infidelity. She wanted it to put it on the grounds of him being a stupid old man. But that's not grounds for divorce, although it should be, in my humble opinion at least. She never let on while she waited for the papers to be typed up. She lived in the same house as father, asked about his day, and was perfectly normal at all times. How she did it, I'll never know. It was if my husband and I would be tempted to smother him in his sleep. In an act of sheer pettiness, my mom insisted that her private investigator was the one to serve the papers to father, and she wanted it to have maximum impact. So, the private investigator followed my father for days until he went to a hotel with Becky. And then he pounded on the hotel room door until my father, in his underwear, finally decided to open the door, and the investigator served him with the divorce papers. I wish I could have seen it. There's a photo, as the photo investigator needed proof that my father had the papers. From that point, emotions were high, and my dad came back home and begged my mom to forgive him. To my mother's credit, she told him there's not a snowflake's chance in heck that she would be forgiving him ever. He had wanted to cut his own children out of his own will in favor of some money-grabbing woman. She asked to see a new will, and that is where things get interesting. My father had not had it witnessed prior to the divorce being served. Oh, so he had hoped Paul or I would do it and accept that he wanted to provide for poor little Becky, who had no one looking after her. But when we refused, he had not known who to ask, and Becky had tried to push him to get one of their mutual friends to do it. Apparently, his friends actually have morals, and no one would do it. In frustration, Becky had come up with the idea that they could forge a witness statement, because who would possibly know, right? My dad, being the gullible fool that he is, went along with that and then admitted it when things went south. Needless to say, there's no way that I will ever have to deal with that will being valid, and we could get it torn to pieces in court, which we ended up having to do, as without the will, my dad was not worth very much, as all the business assets were tied up in a trust for Paul and me. The house was in my mother's name, as it was a property she inherited from grandmother's family, and Grandpa, God rest his beautiful, clever soul, had refused to put my dad's name on the deed. My dad was granted 25% of the family business when my mom and dad were married, but we could easily buy that off him as the business was successful enough for us to pay him out. Which we did, because if he had one midlife crisis, there's nothing to say this wouldn't happen again. My dad begged us to come back to work as he loved the garage, but although Paul would probably have given it to him, I said that there's no way that was happening. How could we work with him knowing he would be happy to take it all away from us? We would find another skilled mechanic to take his place. So, my dad would not come out of the marriage with anything, as they've been married a long time. But it's certainly not the big amount Becky had hoped that she would be able to inherit down the line. By the time my dad had found somewhere to live and used the money to survive until he found a job, or just decided to live off of it, there would be a pittance left by the time he died. He's after all only 66 and could live another 20 years. All of this happened a few months ago, and I've waited for the dust to settle before I wrote this update. I've cut all contact with my father, and I'm still too angry to see him or spend time with him. He's pleaded with me to take his grandchildren to see him, and I didn't want to even do that. But Mother told me that it would be cruel to the children to cut off the contact with Grandfather, so I compromised, and I allowed him to see them once a fortnight, when I would drop them off at the daytime. I would not go into the house, and Paul has been visiting my dad, and I think that he's going to forgive him soon. Well, my mom's doing great. Okay, so finally, what happened to dear old Becky? That homewrecker and nasty little chimney. Well, she hung around longer than we expected, as I think in her tiny little brain, she thought that once the divorce was done and came through, my father would be entitled to half of everything that my mother had and the entirety of the business. She actually even had the audacity to turn up to the divorce hearing, sitting at the back like a cat that got the cream, when it became very clear that my father was actually not in as good as a place as she thought. She was still smug, because the will was there to provide something for her when father died. We provided proof that he was fraudulent and that Becky had actually witnessed the will in her own favor. Turns out Becky did not fancy being charged with fraud, as my mom had instructed her solicitor to look into, and a few days later, Becky did a runner. She just packed up one night and left town. My dad was genuinely upset when she left because he refused to see that she had been a parasite who just saw a foolish man that she could scam. If I had to guess, I would think that this is the first time she has ever scanned a man using her body. As it is, she probably got around $200,000 from my father in jewelry, money, gifts, clothes. As I said, we're pretty well off, and I'm confident we will never see her again. And if we do, we're willing to press charges against her. I wish I could say I'm happy with the outcome, but I'm not. My mom and dad are no longer together. My family's torn apart, so even though we were protected from ruins, I don't feel like we won, and I don't think Becky paid for what she did. I guess sometimes there's just simply no winner. Alright, so this was a very devastating family story. A lot of drama that went down that we had to deal with, but I think the funniest, well, not really funniest, but funny/craziest part of this story was OP's mother was cool, calm, and collect because she already knew. She won! Her husband exposed himself of a dirty cheater, and she didn't even have to do much work to see it. And then she realized, oh, well, it doesn't matter. I have him exactly where I want him. Prenuptial agreement, and he doesn't even own all the family business that he thinks he does own, thanks to her very rich father. Guys, let me know what you think about how this story played out, how OP handled it, or maybe you've been in a situation like this. Drop your comments down below. I want to thank you for joining me on today's story. That's going to cover all the topics for today, but if you're new to the channel, thank you for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed, and subscribe for more daily videos. I'll see you guys tomorrow.